Thank you, Anthony. Like I said, we got a lot going on here, so I'm going to bring on my A-team, my two guests. My first one is Linda Kenny Baden, LKB. Yes. Linda, listen, love having you on.
This case is making me hot.
This case is unbelievable. We've all been commenting it could be one of the best cases we've ever covered because it's got it all, Linda, right? I got a little note here. It's got murder, affairs, hitmen, insurance policies, love triangles, quadrangles, and quintangles, whatever you want to call them.
I guess the triangles and the threesomes. I mean, you know, you had sex pictures being in there. I'm like befuddled.
Yes, we are, but I got to just say one thing. I want people on the Law and Crime Network to know that we aren't just one dog tricks here. We don't just hang out in the studio. In fact, I'm going to ask them to flash up one of the most impressive credentials you have, including your great prolific career as a litigator. And if you don't mind, guys in the room, let's see. Yeah, there it is right there. With the great Aaron Keller. In fact, I was trying to think of, like, how do you describe Aaron introducing us to the world like this? And Aaron, in my mind, is the titular head of all things awesome on the Law and Crime Network. His show, The Daily Debrief, is on at 5 o'clock every day. It's chock full of information.
That's right.
But Linda, there me and you are
Dancing with the Stars with Aaron.
At the Mediaite parties, as you can see there, because we're going to actually have a special segment. Don't we look so happy there? You know, you got to have some fun, right?
We're happy. We're from New Jersey. Of course we're happy.
Absolutely. That's my hashtag Jersey girl. And we got my other super guest, Gene Rossi. Can I see a visual of you right now? I hope you're there. Gene? Okay, well, let's get a little split screen here because right now I want to be able to introduce you. And as you guys know, I often tell Gene Rossi is not only a prolific litigator, 30 years at the DOJ, 3 decades, trained many people, but one of the most impressive is what I call hashtag 4041. That's what I'm talking about. Hashtag 4041. Because, you know, what people say on the Law and Crime Network, Gene, and I find it really interesting, is that they always say, give the question to Rossi. Give the question to Rossi. Well, not just you two, Linda, but I mean, give it to Rossi is something that I understand is something that may have gone on for a long time. As you may remember, he's a person that shot over 1,000 points.
Oh my God!
That's right, brother. Don't play with me, Gene Rossi. I will find you, even with those socks on, for circa.
Oh my God!
And there it is. Cries of "Give it to Rossi" could be heard in the crowd as you toppled Bolton with 1,000 points. There you are, the young Gene Rossi.
Oh, Gene!
What do you think, brother?
Oh my God! You know what's funny, Bob? The year before, I scored 40 points against Bolton. Then the next year, I scored my 1,000 point against him. And that coach, he was like my surrogate father, Coach Danny Jones. I loved him.
I did some more research than just getting pictures, Gene. I heard like half the team is still receiving psychological counseling. Every time they hear the name Rossi, they go into a psychological tailspin.
But they always give me grief. I didn't have a lot of assists.
Well, Gene, listen, it's always a pleasure having fun with you guys. But, guys, we got a really amazing case here, this Denise Williams case. And the testimony of what would have been a co-defendant, but who flipped and is given immunity by the state, full immunity, Brian Winchester, who was in this love triangle and is the person who actually murdered the victim, Mike Williams, in this case. He's testifying on behalf of Team Florida, the state prosecutors there, in order to go after his former girlfriend, paramour, later wife. This is one of the most twisted tales that I have come in front of in a long time, and that's saying a lot, having handled murder cases for 30 years. Let's take a look at Winchester's testimony because it's fascinating. This is direct examination. He's being asked questions by the state's attorney. What you see there is Brian Winchester. He's the one who actually committed the murder. Denise Williams is on trial for having helped him orchestrate and plan the murder. Now, let's get this straight so you understand. They're both married. They've been friends, all four of them, since high school, through college, through marriages, through kids. And now he's talking about the first time that they're all out together and when his wife and her husband are waiting somewhere else, they're getting a car, and this is their first kiss. You know, my dad used to say, a moment of ecstasy, a lifetime of pain. And you're going to see it in this thing, because this is how the relationship now develops. It goes on for years where they're hiding this, and yet Brian Winchester is posing to be the best friend of the victim here, Michael Williams. So let's now listen to a clip where Winchester, who's now testifying on behalf of the state, is explaining how, after all this time, they're together now, you know, impari delicto, as they say in the law, having an illicit affair, and then the plan starts to develop, as life would be, to get rid of the victim in this case. Let's take a look. All right, Brian Winchester, I think it's very important for me to give the audience an idea of what's happening here. This is an 18-year-old case at the time of the arrest. What happened was, eventually, they're talking right there. The plan is to kill each other's spouse. Eventually, that does not happen. But when Mike is eventually killed by the man you just saw there, Brian Winchester, eventually, 18 years later, or 5 years later, he marries Denise Williams, who's on trial right now. You see both of them there, right there. He marries her, and then eventually there's a fight, an argument, whatever you want to call it, a kidnapping, an aggravated assault, where she winds up becoming a victim, going to the police station, and based on a very astute police officer detective who had an idea that these two were probably involved in it, they wind up solving this 18-year-old cold case. He eventually confesses to the kidnapping plot as well as the murder. He gets a 20-year sentence. He gets immunity from the government if he's willing to show where the remains are and also to testify against Denise Williams. Linda, it's a ready-made cross-examination for this guy because he's got a lot of motive to lie. But how's he doing on the stand, and what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, it depends whether you like the big picture. But I think that the cross-examination focused a lot on the immunity deal, as well it should. But the cross-examination also went a little awry because it had to repeat the murder, which is pretty grotesque, right? It's pretty awful that you would do that. You know, when did this guy find God? You put your hand on the Bible, sir. You said to tell the truth. When did he find God? When the jail cell closed behind you, or was it before the jail cell? Because you tried to get out of it. You said, give the body, and you get an immunity. But then they came with you with more, right? They wanted you to talk about her. And you said, okay, I'll do that.
Right, yeah, and listen, we're on direct examination right now, and what Linda is bringing up is the idea that cross-examination may very well bring out a different part of the story. We got to go to break. We'll be right back. Okay, we are going over the Denise Williams case. We all believe that this could be one of the most fascinating cases. Of course, this is the Law and Crime Network, gavel to gavel. I got my great guests with me, Linda and Gene. The A-team is back in the room. We're listening to Winchester's testimony and talking about how they planned out the murder here of Mike Williams, which is Denise Williams' husband. But then a very interesting permutation comes out from Mr. Winchester. That is, Denise got cold feet. Let's take a look. Gene Rossi, I was talking to Linda while the clips were being played, and if I were prosecutor in this case, I would be summing up, because there's going to be a credibility issue here. He's getting all the breaks that Linda just discussed. I would be summing up that if he were lying, he would not be bringing up this piece telling you about how there was renunciation, how she got cold feet. It's one of those things that you can say he's showing that he's credible and believable. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a good point, but you have to reserve that for closing argument. You can't bring that out during direct. But I did want to focus because I want to be quick. Linda's right. You got to spend a heck of a lot of time on his immunity deal and how much time he's avoiding. And this Denise got cold feet and she's wishy-washy. That would be chapter 2 of my cross. That one's a good one. She was wishy-washy, cold feet. You're the one who carried it across the goal line, sir. You were renegade, you were rogue, and you killed him. That would be my cross.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, you know, it gets worse here because after there's cold feet, then there's a let's do it. And we actually listened to Winchester testify about the horrible manner in which Mike was killed. Let's take a look at that clip. Wow, there is so much texture to this cross-examination, Linda and Gene. The one that I took away the most, because he's scoring credibility points about motivation, is desperate to do anything to avoid going to prison. That's with respect to that kidnapping charge he was charged with. Then we got discussions about killing victims and witnesses, which he denies he wanted to participate in, but admits he was trying to fabricate witnesses and obstruct justice and lie. This is the state's main witness, the pretty much only evidence they have against Denise Williams. Gene Rossi, I thought the lawyer hit the high points here, no?
Yes, he did. And you brought up a good point. If he is tampering with witnesses on a kidnapping charge, and I don't know the facts of that charge, it could be a little bit of a stretch on the kidnapping. If he's willing to do that and discuss with a hitman possibly killing somebody, even though he didn't agree, what is he going to do to avoid a first-degree murder charge and possibly the death penalty? The sky is the limit. Now, here's the other place I'd focus on in Cross. There is no way that Denise Williams and this guy did not talk about that big pot of gold, the $1.75 million of insurance proceeds. It wasn't icing on the cake. It was the cake.
Right. And Linda, wait a second. Here's the other thing. In this testimony, he said he was obsessed with her. She got cold feet. Here's the argument I'm making as a defense lawyer. And then he decided to take matters into his own hands. One, because he wanted her. Two, he wanted the money. And therefore, Mike had to go. What do you think?
Yeah, you could even say that to the jury. You can even say, look, even if you assume she did it, she got cold feet, and he just you heard. Even when the poor guy is in the water, he doesn't let him drown. He shoots him in the face. This guy is a murderer. This guy's an absolute murderer. And guess what? Motive, there isn't any for her because she didn't even tell him. And he makes up everything, but he couldn't even talk about a motive because he couldn't legitimately say, yeah, we talked about it.
Right, and Gene, getting to Linda's point, when you're talking about all the constellation of these things, I mean, the government still has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 people through credible witnesses or corroborating evidence. Where is it in this case?
It's weak. It's the big hole in the donut. And I got to criticize the prosecutors a little bit. The jury asked those questions, which were very good. I'm wondering, did the prosecutor ever bring that out on their direct? Because they should have. You know, what role, if any, did the pot of gold have in your planning and your decision? And the prosecutor should have brought that out, not the jury.
Yeah, I think that they're having a difficult time right now, Linda, the prosecution in the case, for all the reasons we're talking about. But let's not forget that there's a picture of her right now, Denise Williams, an audio videotape of this detective who was extremely skilled, asking her questions when she went in as a quote-unquote victim to bring charges against Brian Winchester, who is now testifying against her, so that brings even more motive. And she was really cagey when that detective wanted to talk about the possible murder of her husband. She tried every way possible to get away from that question.
Yeah, because you know they're trying to set you up. She's there as a victim. She just had a gun put in her side. She was actually kidnapped, for which this guy could do life, which he didn't. She wanted life, and then he comes forward. I mean, you know, look, the prosecution ain't all cheese and crackers here, too, because, look, I have before a motion to eliminate they filed. They didn't want the jury to hear that their star witness tried to induce Wade Wilson to do bad things, or pay Kim Adams, or pay Denise Williams, or pay Kevin Winchester. They try to hide that from the jury. They wanted to hide it. So don't tell me the prosecution is all upstanding.
Well, you know, Gene, sometimes, you know, you can have a theory as a prosecutor. We've seen this, having investigated cases many times, and you kind of have a clue, or you think that he may or she may be involved in it. But you got to be very careful. Why would you try to withhold that kind of evidence that Linda's talking about? It's part of the case. It goes to credibility of the witness. Or should they have laid up a little bit, waited a little longer? Was there anything else they could have done, or did they just say, you know what, let's roll with it? But that's really risky because that could be reasonable doubt. What do you think? Well,
that they filed that motion in limine on what we call Giglio, G-I-G-L-I-O information, shows that they're not confident in their case. Whenever I had a witness like this, Brian Winchester, and I had a lot of them, I would embrace their faults. I would embrace their criminal history. I would embrace their lies. But the bottom line is, are they lying in front of this jury? And you have to have faith in your ability to persuade the jury that at this moment they're telling the truth. Period.
Well, Gene, Rossi, and Linda, you know the old phrase. We say it all the time. It exists outside the world of law and inside the world of law. When you sleep with dogs, sometimes you could get a serious case of fleas. We're going to break. We'll be right back. Brian Winchester. Guys, we're talking about all sorts of motive that's been developed here. I'm going to give you one more from that testimony. She is in the police station, let's not forget, because he victimized her, he kidnapped her, and cogitated in his brain is, oh my God, she knows that I murdered her husband, she's going to rat me out potentially, and he knew that the FDLE law enforcement authorities years later saw him and Denise as being suspicious for the death of Mike Williams, and he talks about this agreement. I'm betting dollars to donuts. He sat there when she was in that police station, Linda, and said, yikes, I got some problems here. Let me get this out and blame her. and help myself out.
Well, you know, one of the things I thought the cross-examination should do, Bob, and I got to put my pen down. I know Gene hates that. That they should. When he was asked the question, he had to go back to the story. He couldn't just say yes or no. If you listen to the cross, he had to go back and tell the story before and afterwards, because he's got a story in his head. He can't deviate from him. And one of the things I thought you had to show is, sir, you didn't call, by the way, you kept talking to me, sir. You didn't call your victim, sir, when you shot him in the head. And by the way, you're very cold. You can think of details. You can think of things to do. You can think of plans. You could murder somebody, your best friend, in cold blood. I think you have to make him look like that cogitating murderer, not just somebody who is also a victim.
Gene Rossi, you know, Linda brings up a point that I've always trained on, and I know you've trained over 1,000 prosecutors, DOJ. It's true. They have a narrative in their head how they're going to testify. I remember a murder case I tried where the guy wanted to say 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 happened. On direct examination, he was perfect. But when I said to that witness, tell me about incident number 3, he had a blank stare on his face. And I even said, you know what, let me help you out. That's the thing that happened in the Rose Garden by the church. He could not do it when it wasn't in the narrative because he was lying and eventually admitted he was lying on the witness stand. Oh, that was a great day. But do you notice that, too, that maybe Linda's right? He has to keep resetting in order to answer the questions. And if I were a lawyer, I'd be saying, no, just answer my direct question.
Exactly. Before I get to your question, I don't like pens in opening and closing, but you can use them on the famous Law and Crime Network. How do you like that? But let me answer your question. I got to tell you, I love words. And he says that was our agreement. Okay. This whole charge is a conspiracy.
Okay, we got to go to break, Gene. Sorry to cut you off. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. That is a crime scene investigator, Ward Schwab. Anyway, Linda, I'm impressed by this operation. They go out there. They're confronting all sorts of environmental issues there. They have to go to this lake. We have a report of a body. There's underbrush. They use cadaver dogs. Can't get to the location. They have ground-penetrating radar capabilities. The dog couldn't get a scent. They have to put a dam in order to stop the water from going in. They use heavy equipment, i.e. a backhoe, to remove soil 2 to 4 inches at a time, where law enforcement is then raking through it in order to get access to the ground. I got to be honest with you. I've done a lot of homicide work in my life. I don't think I've ever heard of an operation like that. You?
Well, no, that's what they do to get to a body that's been buried for all this time, and they want this body. And quite frankly, poor Mike Williams has been sitting there. His family hasn't been able to get any closure. Correct? Right. But I am impressed with that. But I want to go just back to the prior witness before, the officer who took the proffer from the defendant here. Remember, that proffer didn't have anything about Denise Williams. If I were the defense attorney, I would have concentrated on that, like I would have rammed it for like an hour.
Gene, on the operation that was being testified to by this crime scene investigator, what are your, I mean, I know they've got the capability to do it. What I'm saying here is that this was an environmentally challenging crime scene for them.
Oh, this was incredible. It was like a Rubik's Cube, and I think it's Schwab, Ward Schwab. But no, this is very detailed, and if they do convict Denise Williams, it will probably be in part because the government had to go to such lengths and such expense to recover the murdered ex-spouse of Denise Williams.
Yeah, and just real quick, guys, I'll ask each of you the same question. I'm impressed by the whole law enforcement approach here. They had these guys on the radar. They're going to Alabama. They're looking for previous cars they own. They're doing a lot of crime scene processing, and eventually they get a break in the case when Denise Williams walks through the door as a victim from Brian Winchester. You never know where your breaks are going to come from. You know, Linda, sometimes your gold comes from someplace you just don't.
Yeah, but sometimes you can target somebody. I mean, I understand targeting him, but sometimes you can target somebody, and the thing will be here. They targeted her, but they don't have the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, that may be true, but the fact of the matter is, because of that incident, they would never have been able to make an arrest and get a conviction of anybody. Don't you agree, Gene?
Yes, and here's something I just thought of. If Denise Williams was really involved in the murder of her ex-husband, why would she go to the police and try to get her husband, or her current husband, or ex-husband, number 2, arrested? Because she would know that he may flip and say, hey, I killed her first husband. She's the one who directed me. You know, you could kind of argue that that doesn't make sense, that she would go to the police and open herself up to potential criminal liability. Because Yeah.
I'm sorry, Gene. The problem with these guys, I've seen it in many, many cases, is that they think they have a quote-unquote agreement like he testified to, and that's nice, hunky-dory, it's dandy, until the time comes when that relationship goes sideways. Now somebody's got something over you. You got compromise is the word that everybody keeps using right now, and oftentimes is what settles the case. We got to go to a break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. You know what struck me? I just think this is fascinating, Linda. But the wedding ring, I don't know, if I were prosecuting this case in summation, I would have that wedding ring up there, that sign of trust that Denise Williams was violating with the Winchester, who's now a state's witness, and the grave they put him in. It's really, that's a compelling piece of evidence, not to mention everything else.
Well, it's compelling, and the question I have is, did she ask for this wedding ring back once the husband was located? Now, the police wouldn't give it to her. The FLE is not going to give it to her. But did she ask for it back?
Yeah, nevertheless, I still feel that is a compelling piece of evidence in this courtroom to bring out, obviously, that she didn't get it back. But we're going to go to a break. We'll be back on the other end. Denise Williams' trial, we got another witness coming in. The cross of that forensic expert was very limited. Gene, Rossi, I want to go to you real quick. We talked to Linda about the ring. I'm curious about your thoughts about that. I'm being told by the eyes and ears at the Law and Crime Network, Kathy Russin, who knows all things, she is like the orb of the trial world, that Denise is looking at these photos with no emotion, which I think is an important point. And also, I was curious on cross-examination that the defense lawyer didn't say, even though the cross was quick, nothing you found connects my client to that crime scene, yes or no, and end on that. What are your thoughts?
Yes. First off, on the last question or the last point, that would be the cross. There's nothing to connect my client to the crime. But to go to Linda's point, I would call a person who handles property and just bring out that no one made a claim for the wedding ring, period. Now, the third point about the demeanor, I wrote that down. Jurors are always watching the defendant. Always. And if she showed no emotion when those photos were placed on the screen, and the testimony about the ring, if she didn't even show a crocodile tear, that is very bad for Denise Williams.
I agree. Jurors are watching everything going on. We got another witness in court. Let's go to court. Okay, welcome back. So there's the pathologist. You know what the cause of death is. It's a homicide case, shotgun wound to the head, facial, which is consistent with the testimony of Brian Winchester, who is now turned a state's witness in this twisted triangle of dysfunction between these people. Linda, you wanted to go back a little bit about a comment that Gene had made, and that was with regard to Kathy Russin's assessment to us that the defendant was showing no emotion when these really horrific photos were being shown. And it's a tough place for a defense lawyer to be, but you had a comment you wanted to make about it.
Yeah, as the person who usually sits next to the murdered defendant and has the camera, just like now, lodged right on me, I always tell my clients, do not show any emotion at all, because you can't win. If you show emotion, oh my God, it's because they're so, they're so upset that they did it, they're showing that they did it. If you don't show emotion, so you can't win. The better thing is just sit there, and after all, some defendants, by the way, are also have drugs. I mean, if you take some young women, and sometimes you have a defendant, they have the medication to make them so they don't show that emotion. So I think that's very important to remember. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I was actually representing a defendant in a murder case some years ago, Gene, and I was concerned because the way the chair was of the defendant was kind of facing the jurors, and I was objected to this, believe it or not, before. I said it's intimidating because he's got only one place to look. It's right into the jurors' eyes. And sure enough, the judge refused the request. Halfway through the trial, two jurors wrote a note that they feel like they're being stared at and intimidated, and it caused a mistrial. So the defendant's reaction in a courtroom is very complex.
I got to differ a little bit with Linda.
Oh, Gene.
A little bit. She doesn't have to show a tear or anything like that, but with her eyes, and just, even though you tell the defendant, I get that, Linda, you're absolutely right. There could be a little bit of pain and agony you can show through your eyes, and a jury's looking at that defendant all the time, and they don't know that this defendant has been told to keep a poker face. The jury doesn't know that. And I've seen reactions by a defendant that helped and hurt them.
Yeah, and that's especially so. Whether or not the defendant may take the stand or not take the stand always makes a difference. Guys, this is a fascinating case. I couldn't have had two better guests to cover this trial. Unfortunately, Linda has to go from being my guest because she's got to get herself ready to be the host, and that will be from 3 to 5. Thank you very much, Linda. I'll stay on with Gene Rossi. We're going to cover more of this trial. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Okay, welcome back. Gene, I want to talk about this Jacob Walter Anderson case, Baylor University. From what I'm reading, I'm just like Googling it real quick. It's like over 12,000 signatures have been brought out. This was a rape charge that was reduced. My point is this. We represent clients all the time, and as prosecutor, I think me and you have talked about this offline. You got to have parity, that is consistency in your sentencing recommendations for cases, because there's wildly disparate ways that these cases are handled. Some who do far less than what this individual was accused of doing go to jail for a long time, and those who do far more sometimes get no jail time. Like in this case, what can we do as in the prosecutor's world? This all gets to prosecutorial discretion. They get to call the shot 90% of the times, as I did. What's the answer to this disparate way that things are handled?
Well, one thing you could do, Bob, is I would not accept a no-low plea. In a case like this, maybe in a traffic case, but in a high-profile case like this, either you plead not guilty or guilty. I'm not giving you a no-low plea because you're not accepting responsibility. You're basically saying, judge, sentence me. I am not admitting I did a crime. That's number one. Number two, I told my prosecutors, I don't care if they're white, black, or fuchsia. I don't care if they're wealthy or poor. I don't care who they are. You have to treat them as if they are one human being and no preferences, either way.
Yeah, Gene, I've been involved in scenarios where you just move it down to a microcosmic level, where within the same county, I remember we talked about this, you could go to one courtroom and the case is handled like 15 years in state prison, go to another courtroom, the offers of probation, and another one where it's kind of like in the middle. And I think prosecutors need to do a better job. I try to do it. Not that we're perfect. Each individual prosecutor sees things differently, but to put in a framework within these offices like we did so that at least supervisors are approving each of these offers in order to have some sort of level of consistency. And from there, you either move up or you move down based upon the aggravating and mitigating factors and strengths and proofs of the case, but at least you have a starting point. Gene Rossi, those are great suggestions you had as well. In Jersey, you don't have no-low pleas. It's either guilty or not guilty to avoid this very issue. And it's an unfortunately tragic scenario, especially on college campuses. We had 5 in Morris County where sexual assault cases are rampant and unfortunately underreported. But listen, we got to go back to this fascinating case of Denise Williams. And during part of Winchester's testimony, remember, this is the guy who committed the murder. He alleges Denise Williams motivated him because they were in pari delicto. They were having a relationship with one another. They know all these 4 people. That's the wives and these 2 men knew each other since high school, through college, through marriages, through having children. They were involved in affairs, cheating on each other, one spouse. And then we find out from Winchester, apparently during his testimony, that there are some sexual photos with him, Denise, who you just saw on the screen right there, and with Winchester's wife. Let's take a look. Okay, guys, so, this, honestly, you need a Rubik's Cube to figure out what is happening here. There is so much deceit and deception. Now pictures with Denise and Kathy with one another. Those are the 2 wives. Presumably he's either involved or taking this picture. The only person that's the odd man out, it seems like, is this guy Mike, who becomes a victim. And we saw what happened to him, because all that's left with him are his little bone fragments and the wedding ring that he wore for his wife Denise. These are people that are engaging in long-term extramarital affairs. Brian Winchester and the victim Mike were supposedly best buds with one another, and Mike was confiding in him about his problems with Denise, who you see on the screen there, and Brian is giving like advice advice and comfort to him when in fact Brian is the one that's having a sexual relationship, you know, with her, and then eventually they murder him, bury him, and then years later they get married with one another, and now Denise is married to with Brian, and then ultimately 18 years later this cold case is solved when they, Denise and I'm sorry to get confused, Brian wind up having a fight, a kidnapping, whatever, and that's what makes this case unravel. Gene Rossi, we've done a lot of work, but this is about as deceptive, long-term, unbelievably distrustful, inhuman in its length, in its scope, in its breadth, if you will, up into the point of just like thinking about murdering both of the other spouses at one point and then murdering Mike ultimately. I mean, it's a really twisted case.
This is going to be a documentary, and it's going to be a made-for-TV movie, and it's probably going to be an episode on Crimes to Remember. It's got it all. And I got to tell you, the more I listen to this guy, I'm not saying I feel sorry for Denise Williams, but he is just a bad dude. I mean, allowing his wife, Kathy, to be photoed with the widow, Denise, on these 3 trips, that is just borderline sick. And number 2, it goes back to his testimony. He always wanted to redo the timeline. And, you know, I got to tell you, I think without the corroboration, Bob, without any DNA, I think she has a shot at an acquittal. A shot, not a slam dunk, but a shot at an acquittal or a hung jury, possibly. But the problem is you've got a guy who's dead, and that's always a hard thing.
Well, you know, Gene, to your point, we kind of discussed this in another trial we covered here at the Law and Crime Network, and you got to love the cases that they pull for us to be able to, you know, chew up and digest, is that, you know, a jury could sit there and say, hey, wait a minute, the prosecutors went hook, line, and sinker. This is what I'd be doing as a defense lawyer. They needed to point the finger. So they take this guy who's being charged with kidnapping and aggravated assault against the defendant, my client right here, and they try to put a square peg in a round hole. This was about insurance money that he knew he'd benefit from. He said he was obsessed with her. This was his plot, his plan. He hid this from my client. And now 18 years later, when his butt is in the stern, he comes forward for a sweetheart 20-year plea offer with immunity in order to put a square peg in a round hole and have you convict my client. I got to be honest with you, I think that's a solid argument for the defense. I
agree. And one thing I would not do, she should not take the stand, period. Only bad things will happen if she takes a stand.
Yeah, you know, Gene, let's real quick. We have less than 45 seconds, but the prosecutors make decisions like this, at least from what you know of this case right now. We can't be critical. We don't know everything. But would you charge this case in this current state?
You have to. Whenever you have a death, as a prosecutor, you obviously done a lot of murder trials. I've just done one, and that was a tough case. You always err on charging a case when you have a murder as cold-blooded as this, and you have a witness who you got to rely on that witness. That's your horse. Let the jury decide, but you have to go forward.
I wonder, Gene, after the decision by the prosecution to charge Denise Williams, whether they found out through the defense or otherwise a lot about this motive information that the defense cross-examined him on during the case and may have gone, oopsie, or typically you lock in, right? Typically they believe he did it, and even if there's bad stuff that comes out, they kind of tend to disregard it and say, hey, how are we going to get around this? But they still believe that she's responsible for this.
Yes, and you know what? I got to say, that witness, Winchester, did not look overly prepared. Those photos, Bob, and you know this, he should have the date, he should have the description. He was like remembering stuff while looking at the photo that possibly could be due to lack of preparation of the witness.
Could be. Got a guy up there who's got a lot of reasons to lie, a lot of motivation, not a good guy. Guy shoots a guy in the face. I'll tell you, I think it's got a little bit of a tough case here. We got to go to break. Gene, we'll be right back. Okay, there we go. That's the general counsel talking about insurance documents. Gene, this is a centerpiece of the state's case, and if I understand the facts of this case, which our audience may find to be unbelievable. I still have the audio in my ear of the trial, so if there's anything that develops, I'll definitely let them know. But, Gene, what I find to be unbelievable is that these policies, or some of these policies, were purchased from Winchester, his friend who killed him.
That, Bob, they were purchased what?
Yeah, these policies, some of the insurance policies, Winchester was an insurance agent. He's the one who signed and filled out and sold some of these policies to his quote-unquote friend, Mike Williams, while he was cheating on Mike Williams with Mike Williams' wife and ultimately killed him.
Exactly. And from what I understand, Winchester and the victim, Mike, had discussions about how much Mike needed for life insurance. This is a made-for-TV movie.
Yeah, there are so many circuitous twists and turns here, because you're right, Gene. At one point, Mike did not want to increase his insurance policy, but Mike and now on trial, Denise Williams had a baby, and she was insistent that he increase it, I believe, from $500,000 to $1 million. And there, guess what? There was his boy, Brian Winchester, more than willing to write that policy for him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, let's go, Gene, back into court, and we'll catch you on the other end. All right, so there's an insurance people getting up there. Gene, I'm just going to let you go to town. You got 45 seconds.
I hate to criticize prosecutors, of course, but I did a lot of tax cases, 30, and the bottom line number is what the jury wants to hear. And you got to prep your witness. This witness was not prepped. I am totally confused.
Yeah, we actually, as we were listening to the testimony ourselves, the way he was saying even the plus 1 million, I'm not even sure what it was, 1 million plus 622, this, that. It was very confusing. It had to be done 2 or 3 times. He doesn't know the commission. Now, the commission is important here because this is Winchester. This is the guy who got a commission for selling the victim, Mike Williams, this increased policy, supposedly while Winchester was speaking to Denise Williams, or not speaking, they were having an affair with one another, about increasing the insurance policy. You want to know how much did Winchester benefit or profit, not only on the front end with the commission, but on the back end when Mike Williams is not, because Winchester said he knew he was going to get a benefit, even though Denise Williams was the beneficiary because he was in a relationship with her. So, Gene, I just think it's craziness. That this whole case is twisty and crazy. We got to go to a break, guys. We're going to be back on the other end with Gene Rossi. More law and crime, more gavel coverage of this fascinating Denise Williams case.
My name is Sam White. About a year ago, I had a heart transplant. My life was saved on the last day that I was supposed to be on this planet. I don't know who my donor was, but that person saved my life. And now I know what a miracle feels like. It feels terrific. Having a new heart's given me time to spend more time with my loved ones, watching them grow up. That new heart gave me a new mission in life, and that is to get others to sign up to be organ and tissue donors. The most common thing I hear when I ask people why they haven't signed up is, I don't know, I just haven't thought about it. Well, why don't you think about it? Think about the life you might save or the life you might enhance. Over 130 million people have already signed up to be an organ, eye, or tissue donor. They're men and women, all ages, all races, and they have one thing in common. They want to save lives. Please sign up to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor. You don't want to miss your chance to save a life.
Hey everyone, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is legal news you can use. The internet can be a complicated place for many different reasons, but one of the questions that seems to always confuse people is, can I use a photo or image that I find online? Let's discuss. Okay, so first, copyrights. Copyrights are all the exclusive rights that someone has in an original work that he or she created, including images. How they're distributed, seen, copied, and otherwise used is up to the copyright owner. Generally, if you created the image, you automatically own the copyright in it. Pretty cool, right? What this means is that you usually need the permission of the copyright owner before using the image. However, ask yourself the following. Are you planning to use the image sparingly, or maybe only a portion of it? Are you not going to make money off of it? Are you using it in a news reporting, educational, or scholarly context that benefits the public? Are you completely changing the image so it's unrecognizable? Are you transforming the meaning of the image, like using it in a parody? Is it impossible to get the permission of the copyright owner? Well, if your answer is yes to some or all of these questions, then you may be able to use it without permission, but that's not always guaranteed. Also, sometimes images no longer are copyright protected, meaning they're in the public domain. Or the owner grants something called a Creative Commons license, allowing others to freely use the image in specific ways. There are websites that offer royalty-free stock images as well. You should look into all that too. Copyrights aside, if the image features a logo or slogan, or a person, particularly a celebrity, then other issues could come into play as well, including trademark, privacy, and right of publicity laws. I told you, complicated. So best practice is to get permission or give credit whenever you can before using an image, particularly on social media. For more legal news you can use, go to lawandcrime.com.
Can I go to the sleepover?
Lucy, I want you to promise me something. If there's any drinking, I want you to say, no thanks, not my thing.
Mom.
I promise you, your real friends won't care. Deal?
I promise, Mom.
They really do hear you.
Did you pack your toothbrush?
For tips on how to start the talk, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A public service message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
Do you know the signs of a brain aneurysm? The worst headache of your life? Pain behind one eye? Dizziness or blurry vision? Don't ignore it. Seek immediate emergency care. The Lisa Calagrassi Foundation. Learn more at lisafoundation.org.
Okay, so we have another insurance person up there. So, Gene, we're finding out a little bit about that $500,000 policy that I was referencing before. But the bottom line to all this is that the beneficiary is the defendant in the case, Denise Williams, and the person who wrote at least two of those policies was the murderer, direct murderer, Brian Winchester, who had been best friends with this guy since high school, college, through marriages and having kids, while for at least 3 years was having an extramarital affair with Mike Williams' wife and then writing him insurance policies. We've been talking about this offline. It's almost difficult to articulate the level of deception here. And we do this all the time, but this has got to be like the #1 most deceptive, twisted case I've seen. How about you, Gene?
It's unbelievable. Winchester hit the trifecta. He killed somebody, so 1, he got a paramour, 2, a paramour with money, and 3, he got money put in his pocket because he was the agent for the life insurance policy. The trifecta.
The Rossi trifecta analysis, you're right. Got money for the premiums and then got potential money on the payout afterwards. Unfortunately, birds of a feather flock together, Gene Rossi, and if you were going to be in cahoots of murdering people, you better make sure you stay besties with them, because when things go sideways, you could wind up prosecuted. We got to go to break. We'll be right back. Hey, Gene, I got to be honest with you. I'm on the edge of my seat. Linda Kenny's right next to me. She's going to be hosting for the next 2 hours. I cannot wait to listen to more testimony. This guy, William Mickler, is indicating that basically they did this undercover, covert operation with recorded conversations. I still hear the trial in my ear, but I'm going to keep on plowing along with respect to this, because this is like some really great investigative stuff. Give me at 15 seconds or less, Gene. Are you impressed by this?
I'm not impressed by the testimony. I'll be impressed by the recorded calls. I love recorded calls. Forget wiretaps. Recorded calls between a cooperator and the defendant are beautiful.
Now, Gene,
I love them.
I said to you before, and I said to Linda, that wait till you get to listen to her statement that she gave the detectives on the day of this kidnapping, and maybe in conjunction with these tapes that Linda's going to have the privilege of probably maybe listening to some of it, together with the motive evidence, the insurance policies. I mean, the state may be getting there. But listen, Gene Rossi, you know it is always an inestimable pleasure to have you and Linda on as a guest, but I got to be honest with you. I know that you're a team player. I know you hit that 1,000-score mark, your hashtag 4041, but how about this, Gene? I think that this is the new team you should be playing on, and I'm going to wait. That's good. There it is, Gene Rossi on Team Bianchi.
Oh my God, that's beautiful.
Hey, Gene, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. I'll be back next Monday. Linda Kenny Baden will be taking it over. You be well.